Good evening, children of the night. Pay close attention to the stars and shadows. The time of great sorrow and of pain has arrived. The time to respect your elder gods is now.
Star Rider. started when we called out to the stars, into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world, and without a single reason why. We were curious, yes, but ultimately I think we were just terribly frightened. And we were young. So very young. We were children, and like a lonely, lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years, we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars in the darkness beyond. Are we alone? But the skies were quiet. Always so quiet. Leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease, and neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet, for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think it responded to the Arecibo message from 1974. The response to the Arecibo message was received almost 3 months ago in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allen Telescope Array picked up what sounded like static interference that continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the entire hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it even had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came from somewhere in the Hercules constellation near Messier 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question. It came not through the radios, but as a voice inside of all of our heads, asked the question to all of us. I heard it. My wife heard it. The young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone everywhere heard this voice whisper that question in their heads, in every language on earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue and had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next. The heavy question seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, and then for weeks. That day changed everything. There were the doubters from the very beginning, and the holy ones who claimed that God had spoken to all of us, and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed they had heard nothing, and those who had claimed that the aliens had given them their own secret messages. And of course, there were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the very first time by an extraterrestrial race like us. One ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life, at least nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in their vastness our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible, something hungry and malevolent. The voice. We realized our mistake when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground seemed to moan. The muffled sound shook through the dust and dirt below us. No one knew what was causing it. At least, not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once, the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child was turning in their graves. All the animals did so too. Every dog, every cat, everything that had ever walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook, and the morgues howled. The voices stopped together in an instant, leaving the world in an amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned. It came as a whisper from behind. An ominous yet oddly playful presence that felt so close, but was truly still so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true. The voice was gone, and the air was again filled with screams. This time they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the raptured before long. And the rest of us were the condemned. We could only wait. The screaming dead was only the first of the side effects that we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night, after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed for the first time. A section of the western sky had turned black, blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all around the edge of some unseen mass. I knew then that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us, as every night that ring of darkness got wider, and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen, and more stars would distort and bleed around it. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The day always brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold and unknown. The animals started disappearing. All of them. No tracks, traces, or bodies were left behind. Pets would run away, some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned. The oceans empty. The air was left silent. The world seemed empty and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore just before the tsunami breaks. One day, about 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped, perhaps, to reason with it. They told it about what was happening to our world and asked it questions. The scientist begged. It didn't speak. The next night, the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was alight for hours, blazoned with orange and red. We didn't realize the effects until the next day when the televisions turned to static and the telephones refused to work. We had sat watching as all the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that, reports became rumors and rumblings. Sanity a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here, and everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and mired in an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knew for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds black as charcoal that blotted out the sun like liquid ash. Darkness fell upon us for days. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. It too had abandoned us. Each day grew slowly darker and darker until night and day became almost one and the same. Some people would claim later that they had seen things in the dark. Creatures, with gangly limbs and crooked faces, lurking in the corners of their vision. They were tall, white creatures that looked molted or rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two before vanishing without a trace. Some believed this was the first step in the aliens' invasion, but the rest of us didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure, but ultimately as harmless as anything else. As harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in duration and number. I think everyone saw them at least once, but I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched nor spoke to anyone, and they certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night, and others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head. He said it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. The churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring hope to any in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at this point nothing that happened surprised anyone anymore. But on the final day, all books of worship burned. Every last Bible, every Quran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith, but found no solace. The churches and temples had suffered the same fates, if not worse. The people were left, abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world with walls formed from the bodies of those who sought refuge. They were merged to the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died, still pleading for hope. But they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had learned to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky, it fell upon us. The voice echoed, and it spoke the simple truth. I am here. There is a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves so fast. The stars are dying now, and I know they'll never be seen again. The light is dying so fast. I leave this not as a warning. No, it's far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization, the last humanity will ever know. For we used to wonder whether or not we were alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should have never beckoned to the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we returned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one truth to be certain. I now know why the skies were always so quiet.
Well, children, here we are on the edge of the night, just before the witching hour, when the cackles of the women riding their slick brooms in the moonlight couple with the lonesome songs of owls and crickets and wolves, heaping praise unto the spirits of the dark. And what is that just ahead? Where the road bends and cobalt clouds appear to kiss the earth. The clouds are moving, their edges lined with fire. Something has emerged from the darkness, something old and hostile. Something gigantic that still believes it is the master of the universe. This beast has 1,000 eyes and 1,000,000 fangs, and moves on joints authored by creators lurking in alternate dimensions. This beast moves in ways you cannot predict. You have but two options, my children. You may die kicking and screaming, confident your defiance will amount to anything more than nothing. Or you may pass with dignity. You may get on your knees and respect your elder gods.
You are listening to Respect Your Elder Gods on KBGA Missoula.
My attention for the last 3 years had been repeatedly drawn to the subject of mesmerism. And about 9 months ago, it occurred to me quite suddenly that in the series of experiments made hitherto, there had been a very remarkable and most unaccountable omission. No person had as yet been mesmerized in articulo mortis, at the point of death. It remained to be seen first whether in such a condition there existed in the patient any susceptibility to the mesmeric influence. Secondly, whether this influence was affected by the act of dying. Thirdly, to what extent, or for how long a period, the approach of death might be arrested by the process. In looking around me for some subject on whom to experiment, I was brought to think of my friend, Monsieur Ernest Valdemar, who has resided principally at Harlem, New York, since the year 1839. On 2 or 3 occasions, I had put him to sleep with little difficulty. His physician had declared him a confirmed tubercular. It was his custom, indeed, to speak calmly of his approaching death as a matter neither to be avoided nor regretted. I spoke to him frankly, describing my curiosity as to what effect mesmerism would have upon a man at the point of death, and his interest seemed vividly excited. He agreed to the experiment, and it was arranged that he would send for me about 24 hours before the time his physicians expected him to die. It is now rather more than 7 months since I received from Monsieur Valdemar himself the following note. You may as well come now. My doctors have agreed that I cannot hold out beyond tomorrow midnight, and I think they have hit the time very nearly. Signed, Valdemar. I went to him immediately. We spoke freely on the subject of his approaching death, as well as more particularly of the experiment proposed. He still professed himself quite willing and even anxious to have it made, and urged me to commence it at once. I was induced to proceed by my conviction that I had not a moment to lose, as he was evidently sinking fast. I commenced the passes which I had already found most effectual in subduing him. At 5 minutes before 11, I perceived unequivocal signs of mesmeric influence. With a few rapid lateral passes, I made the eyelids quiver, and with a few more, I closed them altogether. At 3 o'clock in the morning, his pulse was imperceptible, the breathing almost stopped. His limbs were rigid and cold as marble. Still, the general appearance was certainly not that of death. I ventured a few words of conversation. Monsieur Valdemar, I said, are you asleep? He made no answer, but I perceived a tremor about the lips, and was thus induced to repeat the question again and again. At its 3rd repetition, his whole body was agitated by a very slight shivering. The eyelids unclosed themselves so far as to display a white line of the ball. The lips moved sluggishly, and from between them, in a barely audible whisper, issued the words, Yes, asleep now. Do not wake me. Let me die. Well, do you still feel pain in the chest, Monsieur Valdemar? No pain. I am dying. Well, I didn't think it advisable to disturb him further just then, and nothing more was said or done until the arrival of Dr. Farnham, who came a little before sunrise and expressed unbounded astonishment at finding the patient still alive. After feeling the pulse and applying a mirror to the lips, he requested me to speak to Valdemar again, and I did so, saying, Monsieur Valdemar, do you still sleep? As before, some minutes elapsed before a reply was made, and during the interval, the dying man seemed to be collecting his energies to speak. At my 4th repetition of the question, he said very faintly, almost inaudibly, Yes, still asleep, dying. Just then, Monsieur Valdemar apparently died. His eyes rolled slowly open, the pupils disappearing upwardly. The skin generally assumed a cadaverous hue, resembling not so much parchment as white paper. The upper lip at the same time writhed itself away from the teeth, which it had previously covered completely, while the lower jaw fell with an audible jerk, leaving the mouth widely extended and disclosing in full view the swollen and blackened tongue. I presume that no member of the party then present had been unaccustomed to deathbed horrors, but so hideous beyond conception was the appearance of Monsieur Valdemar at this moment that there was a general shrinking back from the region of the bed. There was no longer the faintest sign of vitality in Monsieur Valdemar, and concluding him to be dead, we were consigning him to the charge of the nurses when a strong vibration was observed in his tongue. Then there issued from the distended and motionless jaws a voice such as it would be madness to attempt describing. It seemed to reach our ears from a vast distance or from some deep cavern within the earth. Monsieur Valdemar spoke, obviously in reply to the question I had put to him a few minutes before, when I asked if he still slept. He now said,
"No, I have been sleeping, and now I am dead."
No person present even affected to deny or attempted to repress the unutterable shuddering horror which these few words thus uttered were so well calculated to convey. Slowly, very slowly, we regained our senses. We examined the body again for signs of life. There was no breath, and the attempt to draw blood from the arm failed. The only indication, indeed, of the mesmeric influence was now found in the vibration of the tongue whenever I asked Monsieur Valdemar a question. He seemed to be making an effort to reply, but could not. For the next day, we discussed the propriety and feasibility of awakening him, but we had little difficulty in agreeing that no good purpose could be served by so doing. It was evident that, so far, death, or what is usually termed death, had been arrested by the mesmeric process. It seemed clear to us that to awaken Monsieur Valdemar would be merely to ensure his instant, or at least his speedy, dissolution. From this period until the close of last week, an interval of nearly 7 months, we continued to make daily calls at Monsieur Valdemar's house. During these 7 months, Valdemar remained exactly as I have last described him. It was on last Friday that we finally resolved to make the experiment of awakening or attempting to awaken him. I made the customary passes. These, for a time, were unsuccessful. The first indication of revival was afforded by a partial descent of the eyes. It was observed as especially remarkable that this was accompanied by an outflowing of a yellowish ichor from beneath the lids of a pungent and highly offensive odor. And then I asked, "Monsieur Valdemar, can you explain to us what are your feelings or wishes now?" The tongue quivered, or rather rolled violently in the mouth, although the jaws and lips remained rigid as before, and at length the same hideous voice which I have already described spoke.
For God's sake, quick, waken me, quick. I say to you that I am dead.
I was thoroughly unnerved, and for an instant remained undecided what to do. Then I set about awakening him. In this attempt, I soon saw that I should be successful, and I'm sure that all in the room were prepared to see the patient awaken. For what really occurred, however, it is quite impossible that any human being should have been prepared. As I rapidly made the mesmeric passes, his whole body at once, within the space of a single minute or even less, shrunk, crumbled, absolutely rotted away beneath my hands. Upon the bed before the whole company, there lay a nearly liquid mass of loathsome, of detestable putrescence.
You have found yourself in the midst of a nightmare from which you cannot awaken. You find yourself giving over to the gods lurking in the pitch of outer space, sharpening their teeth for the feast they shall make of your flesh. Heed the words of the ancients, and do as the mighty ones command. Kneel, my children, and respect your elder gods.
In Umbri, city of the Delta, the lights blazed with a garish brilliance after the setting of that sun which was now a coal-red decadent star, grown old beyond chronicle, beyond legend. Most brilliant, most garish of all were the lights that illumined the house of the aging poet Famurza, whose anacreontic songs had brought him the riches that he dispersed in orgies for his friends and sycophants. Here, in porticos, halls, and chambers, the cressets were thick as stars in a cloudless vault. It seemed that Formosa wished to dissipate all shadows, except those in arrased alcoves set apart for the fitful amours of his guests. For the kindling of such amours there were wines, cordials, aphrodisiacs. There were meats and fruits that swelled the flaccid pulses. There were strange exotic drugs that aroused and prolonged pleasure. There were curious statuettes in half-veiled niches, and wall panels painted with bestial loves, or loves human or superhuman. There were hired singers of all sexes who sang ditties diversely erotic, and dancers whose contortions were calculated to restore the outworn sense when all else had failed. But to all such incontents Valzane, pupil of Formosa, and renowned both as poet and voluptuary, was insensible. With indifference turning toward disgust, a half-emptied cup in his hand, he watched from a corner the galer throng that eddied past him, and averted his eyes involuntarily from certain couples who were too shameless or drunken to seek the shadows of privacy for their dalliance. A sudden satiety had claimed him. He felt himself strangely withdrawn from the morass of wine and flesh into which, not long before, he had still plunged with delight. He seemed as one who stands on an alien shore beyond waters of deepening separation. "What ails you, Valzane? Has a vampire sucked your blood?" It was Formosa, flushed, grey-haired, slightly corpulent, who stood at his elbow, laying an affectionate hand on Valzane's shoulder. He hoisted aloft with the other that fasininely graven quart goblet from which it was wont to drink only wine, eschewing the drugged and violent liquors often preferred by the Sybarites of Umbri. "Is it biliousness or unrequited love? We have cures here for both. You have only to name your medicine." "There is no medicine for what ails me," countered Valzane. "As for love, I have ceased to care whether it be requited or unrequited. I can taste only the dregs in every cup, and tedium lurks at the middle of all kisses. Truly, yours is a melancholy case." There was concern in Formosa's voice. "I have been reading some of your late verses. You write only of tombs and yew trees, of maggots and phantoms and disembodied loves. Such stuff gives me the colic. I need at least a half-gallon of honest vine juice after each poem." "Though I did not know it till lately," admitted Valzane. "There is in me a curiosity toward the unseen, a longing for things beyond the material world." Formosa shook his head commiserately. "Though I have attained to more than twice your years, I am still content with what I see and hear and touch. Good, juicy meats, women, wine, the songs of full-throated singers are enough for me." "In the dreams of slumber," mused Valzane, "I have clasped succubi who were more than flesh, have known delights too keen for the waking body to sustain. Do such dreams have any source outside the earth-born brain itself? I would give much to find that source, if it exists. In the meanwhile, there is nothing for me but despair." "So young, and yet so exhausted. Well, if you're tired of women and want phantoms instead, I might venture a suggestion. Do you know the old necropolis lying midway between Umbri and Sium, a matter of perhaps 3 miles from here? The goatherds say that a lamia haunts it, the spirit of the Princess Mortilla, who died several centuries ago and was interred in a mausoleum that still stands, overtowering the lesser tombs. Why not go forth tonight and visit the necropolis? It should suit your mood better than my house, and perhaps Mortilla will appear to you. But don't blame me if you return with a nibbled throat, or fail to return at all. After all those years, the lamia is still avid for human lovers, and she might well take a fancy to you." "Of course, I know the place," said Valzane, "but I think you are jesting." Formosa shrugged his shoulders and moved on amid the revellers. A laughing dancer, blonde-limbed and lissom, came up to Valzane and threw a noose of plaited flowers about his neck, claiming him as her captive. He broke the noose gently and gave the girl a tepid kiss that caused her to make wry faces. Unobtrusively but quickly, before others of the merry-makers could try to entice him, he left the house of Formosa. Without impulses other than that of an urgent desire for solitude, he turned his steps toward the suburbs, avoiding the neighborhood of taverns and lupanars where the populace thronged. Music, laughter, snatches of song followed him from lighted mansions where symposia were held nightly by the city's richer denizens. But he met few roisterers on the streets. It was too late for the gathering, too early for the dispersal. of guests at such symposia. Now the lights thinned out, with ever-widening intervals between, and the streets grew shadowy with that ancient night which pressed about Umbri, and would wholly quench its defiant galaxies of lamp-bright windows with the darkening of Zotique's senescent sun. Of such things, and of death's encircling mystery, were the musings of Valzane as he plunged into the outer darkness that he found grateful to his glare-wearied eyes. Grateful, too, was the silence of the field-bordered road that he pursued for a while without realizing its direction. Then, at some landmark familiar despite the gloom, it came to him that the road was the one which ran from Umbri to Sium, that sister city of the Delta. The road beside, whose middle meanderings was situated the long disused necropolis to which Formosa had ironically directed him. Truly, he thought, the earthly-minded Formosa had somehow plumbed the need that lay at the bottom of his disenchantment with all sensory pleasures. It would be a good visit, to sojourn for an hour or so in that city whose people had long passed beyond the lusts of mortality, beyond satiety and disillusion. A moon, swelling from the crescent toward the half, arose behind him as he reached the foot of the low-mounded hill on which the cemetery lay. He left the paved road and began to ascend the slope itself, half covered with stunted gorse, at whose summit the glimmering marbles were discernible. It was without path other than the broken trails made by goats and their herders. Dim, lengthened and attenuate, his shadow went before him like a ghostly guide. In his fantasy, it seemed to him that he climbed the gently sloping bosom of the giantess, studded afar with pale gems that were tombstones and mausoleums. He caught himself wondering, amid this poetic whimsy, whether the giantess was dead or merely slept. Gaining the flat, expansive ground of the summit, where dwarfish dying yews disputed with leafless briars the intervals of slabs blotched with lichen, he recalled the tale that Formosa had mentioned, anent the Lamia who was said to haunt the necropolis. Formosa, he knew well, was no believer in such legendary, and had meant only to mock his funereal mood. Yet, as a poet will, he began to play with the fancy of some presence, immortal, lovely, and evil, that dwelt amid the antique marbles and would respond to the evocation of one who, without positive belief, had longed vainly for visions from beyond mortality. Through headstone aisles of moon-touched solitude, he came to a lofty mausoleum, still standing with few signs of ruin at the cemetery's center. Beneath it, he had been told, were extensive vaults housing the mummies of an extinct royal family that had ruled over the twin cities Umbri and Sium in former centuries. The Princess Mortilla had belonged to this family. To his startlement, a woman, or what appeared to be such, was sitting on a fallen shaft beside the mausoleum. He could not see her distinctly. The tomb's shadow still enveloped her from the shoulders downward. The face alone, glimmering wanly, was lifted to the rising moon. Its profile was such as he had seen on antique coins. "Who are you?" he asked, with a curiosity that overpowered his courtesy. "I am the Lamia Mortilla," she replied, in a voice that left behind it a faint and elusive vibration like that of some briefly sounded harp. "Beware me, for my kisses are forbidden to those who would remain numbered among the living." Balzane was startled by this answer that echoed his fantasies. Yet reason told him that the apparition was no spirit of the tombs, but a living woman who knew the legend of Mortilla, and wished to amuse herself by teasing him. And yet, what woman would venture alone and at night to a place so desolate and eerie? Most credibly, she was a wanton who had come out to keep a rendezvous amid the tombs. There were, he knew, certain perverse debauchees who required sepulchral surroundings and furnishings for the titillation of their desires. "Perhaps you are waiting for someone," he suggested. "I do not wish to intrude, if such is the case." "I wait only for him who is destined to come, and I have waited long, having had no lover for 200 years. Remain, if you wish, There is no one to fear but me." Despite the rational surmises he had formed, there crept along Valzane's spine the thrill of one who, without fully believing, suspects the presence of a thing beyond nature. Yet surely it was all a game that he too could play for the beguilement of his ennui. "I came here hoping to meet you," he declared. "I am weary of mortal women, tired of every pleasure, tired even of poetry." "I too am bored," she said simply. The moon had climbed higher, shining on the dress of antique mode that the woman wore. It was cut closely at waist and hips and bosom, with voluminous downward folds. Valzane had seen such costumes only in old drawings. The Princess Mortilla, dead for 3 centuries, might well have worn a similar dress. Whoever she might be, he thought, the woman was strangely beautiful, with a touch of quaintness in the heavily coiled hair whose colour he could not decide in the moonlight. There was a sweetness about her mouth, a shadow of fatigue or sadness beneath her eyes. At the right corner of her lips he discerned a small mole. Valzane's meeting with the self-named Mortilla was repeated nightly while the moon swelled like the rounding breast of a titaness and fell away once more to hollowness and senescence. Always she awaited him by the same mausoleum, which, she declared, was her dwelling place. And always she dismissed him when the east turned ashen with dawn, saying that she was a creature of the night. Skeptical at first, he thought of her as a person with macabre leanings and fantasies akin to his own, with whom he was carrying on a flirtation of singular charm. Yet about her he could find no hint of the worldliness that he suspected, no seeming knowledge of present things, but a weird familiarity with the past and the Lamia's legend. More and more she seemed a nocturnal being, intimate only with shadow and solitude. Her eyes, her lips, appeared to withhold secrets forgotten and forbidden. In her vague, ambiguous answers to his questions, he read meanings that thrilled him with hope and fear. "I have dreamed of life," she told him cryptically, "and I have dreamed also of death. Now perhaps there is another dream, into which you have entered." "I too would dream," said Valzane. Night after night, his disgust and weariness sloughed away from him, in a fascination fed by the spectral milieu, the environing silence of the dead, his withdrawal and separation from the carnal, garish city. By degrees, by alternations of unbelief and belief, he came to accept her as the actual Lamia. The hunger that he sensed in her could be only the Lamia's hunger, her beauty that of a being no longer human. It was like a dreamer's acceptance of things fantastic elsewhere than in sleep. Together with his belief, there grew his love for her. The desires he had thought dead revived within him, wilder, more importunate. She seemed to love him in return, yet she betrayed no sign of the Lamia's legendary nature, eluding his embrace, refusing him the kisses for which he begged. "Sometime, perhaps," she conceded, "but first you must know me for what I am, must love me without illusion. Kill me with your lips, devour me as you are said to have devoured other lovers," beseeched Valzane. "Can you not wait?" Her smile was sweet and tantalizing. "I do not wish your death so soon, for I love you too well. Is it not sweet to keep our tryst among the sepulchres? Have I not beguiled you from your boredom? Must you end it all?" The next night he besought her again, imploring with all his ardour and eloquence the denied consummation. She mocked him. "Perhaps I am merely a bodiless phantom, a spirit without substance. Perhaps you have dreamed me. Would you risk an awakening from the dream?" Valzane stepped toward her, stretching out his arms in a passionate gesture. She drew back, saying, "What if I should turn to ashes and moonlight at your touch? You would regret then your rash insistence." "You are the immortal Lamia," avowed Valzane. "My senses tell me that you are no phantom, no disembodied spirit, but for me you have turned all else to shadow." Yes, I am real enough in my fashion, she granted, laughing softly. Then suddenly she leaned toward him and her lips touched his throat. He felt their moist warmth a moment, and felt the sharp sting of her teeth that barely pierced his skin, withdrawing instantly. Before he could clasp her, she eluded him again. "It is the only kiss permitted to us at present," she cried, and fled swiftly with the soundless footfalls among the gleams and shadows of the sepulchres. On the following afternoon, a matter of urgent and unwelcome business called Valzane to the neighboring city of Sium, a brief journey, but one that he seldom took. He passed the ancient necropolis, longing for that nocturnal hour when he could hasten once more to a meeting with Mortilla. Her poignant kiss, which had drawn a few drops of blood, had left him greatly fevered and distraught. He, like that place of tombs, was haunted, and the haunting went with him into Sium. He had finished his business, the borrowing of a sum of money from a usurer. Standing at the usurer's door, with that slightly obnoxious but necessary person beside him, he saw a woman passing on the street. Her features, though not her dress, were those of Mortilla, and there was even the same tiny mole at one corner of her mouth. No phantom of the cemetery would have startled or dismayed him more profoundly. "Who is that woman?" he asked the moneylender. "Do you know her?"
"Her name is Beldith. She is well known in Sium, being rich in her own right and having had numerous lovers. I've had a little business with her, though she owes me nothing at present. Should you care to meet her? I can easily introduce you."
"Yes, I should like to meet her," agreed Valzane. "She looks strangely like someone that I knew a long time ago." The usurer peered slyly at the poet.
"She might not make too easy a conquest. It is said of late that she has withdrawn herself from the pleasures of the city. Some have seen her going out at night toward the old necropolis, or returning from it in the early dawn. Strange tastes, I'd say, for one who is little more than a harlot. But perhaps she goes out to meet some eccentric lover."
"Direct me to her house," Valzane requested. "I shall not need you to introduce me."
"As you like."
The moneylender shrugged, looking a little disappointed.
"It's not far, anyway."
Valzane found the house quickly. The woman Beldith was alone. She met him with a wistful and troubled smile that left no doubt of her identity. "I perceive that you have learned the truth," she said. "I had meant to tell you soon, for the deception could not have gone on much longer. Will you not forgive me?" "I forgive you," returned Valzane sadly. "But why did you deceive me?" "Because you desired it. A woman tries to please the man whom she loves, and in all love there is more or less deception. Like you, Valzane, I had grown tired of pleasure, and I sought the solitude of the necropolis, so remote from carnal things. You, too, came seeking solitude and peace, or some unearthly spectre. I recognized you at once, and I had read your poems. Knowing Mortilla's legend, I thought to play a game with you. Playing it, I grew to love you. Valzane, you loved me as the Lemire. Can you not now love me for myself?" "It cannot be," averred the poet. "I fear to repeat the disappointment I have found in other women. Yet at least I am grateful for the hours you gave me. They were the best I have known, even though I have loved something that did not and could not exist. Farewell, Mortilla. Farewell, Beldith." When he had gone, Beldith stretched herself face downward among the cushions of her couch. She wept a little, and the tears made a dampness that quickly dried. Later she arose briskly enough and went about her household business. After a time she returned to the loves and revelries of Sium. Perhaps in the end she found such peace as may be given to those who have grown too old for pleasure. But for Valzane there was no peace, no balm for this last and most bitter of disillusionments. Nor could he return to the carnalities of his former life. So it was that he finally slew himself, stabbing his throat to its deepest vein with a keen knife in the same spot which the false Lamia's teeth had bitten, drawing a little blood. After his death he forgot that he had died, forgot the immediate past with all its happenings and circumstances. Following his talk with Formosa, he had gone forth from Formosa's house and from the city of Umbri, and had taken the road that passed the abandoned cemetery. Seized by an impulse to visit it, he had climbed the slope toward the marbles under a swelling moon that rose behind him. Gaining the flat, expansive ground of the summit, where dwarfish dying yews disputed with leafless briars the intervals of slabs blotched with lichen, he recalled the tale that Formosa had mentioned, anent the Lamia who was said to haunt the necropolis. Formosa, he knew well, was no believer in such legendary, and had meant only to mock his funereal mood. Yet, as a poet will, he began to play with the thought of some presence, immortal, lovely and evil, that dwelt amid the antique marbles and would respond to the evocation of one who, without positive belief, had longed vainly for visions from beyond mortality. Through headstone aisles of moon-touched solitude, he came to a lofty mausoleum, still standing with few signs of ruin at the cemetery's center. Beneath it, he had been told, were extensive vaults housing the mummies of an extinct royal family that had ruled over the twin cities Umbri and Siam in former centuries. It was to this family that the Princess Mortilla had belonged. To his startlement, a woman, or what appeared to be such, was sitting on a fallen shaft beside the mausoleum. He could not see her distinctly. The tomb's shadow still enveloped her from the shoulders downward. The face alone, glimmering wanly, was lifted to the rising moon. Its profile was such as he had seen on antique coins. "Who are you?" he asked, with a curiosity that overpowered his courtesy. "I am the Lamia Mortilla," she replied.
You are listening to Respect Your Elder Gods on KBGA Missoula.
Children, are you addicted to doom? Do you look forward to the day they put the lid on your coffin with you inside it and lower you into the ground to provide a feast for the rats and the worms? Does the light of the sun offend you? Do rainbows and lollipops make you want to reach for a chainsaw and carve a bloody path through the mindless masses? If you are the kind of person who takes pride when a local cheerleader refers to you as creepy, you have found your home, and that home is right here. And all you are asked to do, my friends and allies, is respect your elder gods.
one of the frightened. Have you had your fortune told recently? Did the gypsy read cards or look into a crystal ball to tell you what the future held in store for you? The three Gamboli sisters wanted to know, and their fortune teller told them one sunny day in Italy. Now the Gamboli sisters were triplets. They were as like as 3 peas in a pod, and their names were Rita, Jesa, and Lena, and since their parents' death they had supported themselves as seamstresses. Their 19th birthday was the day of the big festival at the town square, and the sisters went into the tent of the fortune teller and demanded of the old crone there to know their fortunes and how soon they would marry. The old crone gazed into the crystal and shook her craggy, ancient head. "You will never marry, my dear," she cackled, "because you'll all be dead before the year is out." The girls laughed, but deep in their hearts there came a dim sense of fear. The bony fingers singled out Rita and told her that she would die of pneumonia. Jesa and Lena trembled when the old woman whispered something far more terrible about them. Jesa would die at Lena's hands, and Lena in turn would die because of killing her sister. Now they were sure the old woman was crazy, and shouting insults at her, they bounced out of the tent to seek their admirers in the warmth and gaiety of the festival. But the old gypsy's words stayed with them. Within a month, Rita died on the night of a full moon of pneumonia. Jesa and Lena were heartbroken and chilled with the prophecy that seemed to be coming true. All the village mourned, and the girls in their bereavement sought to find some comfort in love. But such is fortune. They both fell in love with the same man, a tall, dashing man of the village, Antonio. Lena and Jesa had always loved each other as sisters, but now they were women both vying for the same man. One night, 3 months to the day of Rita's death, they went at each other like tigresses in their little hut on the north end of the village. In a craze of passion, Lena plunged her seamstress's shears deep into Jesa's heart. Lena, overcome first with remorse and then fear, dragged her sister's body out to the well, and with the strength of the guilty one who hides a crime, dropped Jesa's body down into the dark, slimy interior. She fled back into the house and fell to her knees before the statue of the Madonna on the kitchen wall and prayed for forgiveness. In her mad desire for Antonio, she'd forgotten the gypsy woman's dire prophecy, and now she had Antonio. And she told the people of the village that Jesa had run away because Antonio preferred her sister. But on the day of the wedding, Lena, resplendent in her lace bridal gown, went to the well and stared down into the place where her sister's body was hidden from the eyes of the world. In the few inches of dirty, scummy water at the well's bottom, she saw the huddled outline of Jesa's decayed body there. Quite unexpectedly, a bat flew up out of the well and settled in Lena's black, luxuriant hair. Screaming and twisting, she tried to beat it off, but the bat flapped its wings maddeningly and hung on. Lena whirled and tripped over the rim of the well, screaming like a banshee, her fingernails raking the walls as she fell. When the townspeople lowered a ladder into the well, they found the bodies. And even Antonio could see that the point of the seamstress shears sticking out through Jesa's back had knifed right into Lena's falling body. So the prophecy was fulfilled. Rita died of pneumonia, Lena killed Jesa, and Jesa killed Lena. A triple slay, you might call it, but where was I? Oh, yes, your fortune, my dear. Now, let's see. Ah, yes, I think you're going to kill somebody.
11:55. Almost midnight. Enough time for one more story. One more story before 12. Just to keep us warm. In 5 minutes, it'll be the 21st of April. 100 years ago, on the 21st of April, out on the waters around Spivey Point, a small clipper ship drew toward land. Suddenly, out of the night, the fog rolled in. For a moment, they could see nothing, not a foot ahead of them. And then they saw a light. My God, it was a fire burning on the shore, strong enough to penetrate the swirling mist. They steered a course toward the light, but it was a campfire like this one. The ship crashed against the rocks. The hull sheared in two, the mast snapped like a twig, and the wreckage sank with all the men aboard. At the bottom of the sea lay the Elizabeth Dane with her crew, their lungs filled with salt water, their eyes open and staring into the darkness. And above, as suddenly as it had come, the fog lifted, receded back across the ocean, and never came again. But it is told by the fishermen and their fathers and grandfathers that when the fog returns to Antonio Bay, the men at the bottom of the sea, out in the water by Spivey Point, will rise up and search for the campfire that led them to their dark and icy death. 12 o'clock, the 21st of April.
You have been listening to Respect Your Elder Gods on KBGA Missoula with your host, Mr. C. I hope you can join us again next week at the same time for more doom and gloom and sludge and blood and guts and all the other gory details that make life worth dying for. Until then, do remember to watch the skies and study the shadows, and always respect your elder gods.